During the second half of the 20th century, the United States encountered numerous threats both at home and abroad. As conditions spiraled into disorder, and James Richard Allen was sworn in as the 42nd President of the United States in 1993, a coalition of government bodies, referred to as the Gang of Four, came together to carry out a covert takeover from within the United States of America's federal government, effectively dismantling the nation's federal democratic structure. This clandestine group consisted of leaders from four major agencies: the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, along with key figures from the executive branch. To legitimize their efforts, they brought in the Attorney General, who framed their subversive actions as justified responses to foreign countries allegedly supporting drug trafficking and criminal or terrorist networks, thereby involving the DEA and FBI. The CIA offered intelligence and covert operation capabilities. The agency's chief concern was the rising autonomy of South and Central American countries, whose growing independence posed a threat to the monopolized markets of influential United States corporations. In response, the CIA backed insurgent groups in order to undermine governments seen as leaning towards socialism. Domestic opposition was suppressed by branding dissidents as enemies of the state, a task carried out by the FBI. The Bureau also engaged in surveillance, wiretapping, and intelligence gathering within the country. Although initially playing a limited role, the FBI eventually became deeply involved as the gang began deploying paramilitary units made up of federal agents to maintain control over defiant states. The DEA served as the pretext for military actions in South and Central America, aligning with pharmaceutical giants that sought to eliminate local drug cartels and replace the local supply with their own synthetic drug products. These aggressive actions drew sharp criticism from the Organization of American States in South America. After the Panama Canal Treaty lapsed and control returned to Panama, the U.S. dispatched forces to seize it again, citing national security. The Panamanian forces retreated into the mountains and began guerrilla warfare along the borders of Honduras and Nicaragua. By 1994, the U.S. had expanded its military operations into these countries, escalating the conflict into a large-scale war. Echoing the Vietnam War, the fighting set local populations against foreign occupiers. Echoing the Vietnam War, the fighting set local populations against foreign occupiers. In response, the United States developed highly advanced mechanized light infantry units, dubbed cyber soldiers, utilizing cutting-edge technologies from the early 1990s. As the conflict wore on, the American military adapted. Like the Vietnam War had led to the creation of air mobile units, the Central American conflict spurred the evolution of complete aerial combat units using aerodynes. Helicopters were too vulnerable for dense jungle terrain and anti-aircraft fire, but Aerodynes, with their superior speed and agility, proved viable. Most modern Aerodynes by 2020 could trace their origins to the AVX-2, the first successful combat-ready model. The U.S. Armed Forces increasingly relied on air mobility and cutting-edge long-range smart weaponry, alongside tactics focused on non-stop 24-hour combat. These strategies helped reduce U.S. casualties and shift momentum in the conflict. Meanwhile, faced with the growing influence of the European Economic Community, the Gang of Four launched a covert campaign of sabotage known as the Quiet War. As European power expanded, U.S. meddling in the region became increasingly unwelcome. Soon, Europe overtook America in global dominance, especially as U.S. foreign policy grew increasingly aggressive. Once the EEC had solidified its power, it defied Washington by sending aid to the Soviet states, directly undermining U.S. interests. As a result, the Soviets accepted the euro-dollar over U.S. currency, and NATO effectively disintegrated when the Soviet Union made peace with Western Europe for the first time in decades. Angered by its declining status and alarmed by the EEC's burgeoning space program, which had tested a lunar mass driver by early 1993, the NSA intensified its efforts to destabilize Europe, employing tactics like stock manipulation and attempting to derail military treaty negotiations between the EEC and Soviet states. By manipulating stocks and currencies, the gang fabricated an illusion of American prosperity. But when the EEC exposed the fraud to international media, trust in U.S. financial stability collapsed. The economic crash of 1994 followed, and trade embargoes were swiftly imposed against the U.S. by nearly every major economic power. The collapse of '94 devastated everyday Americans. Millions lost their savings, becoming homeless or forced to live with relatives. Others formed tight-knit, clan-like units to survive. Though some endured, the death toll reached into the millions. With both the World Bank and Stock Exchange gone, the US government could no longer borrow money to maintain its economy. Investors rapidly cashed out bonds, and the Treasury couldn't print currency fast enough to keep up. The value of the dollar took a massive nosedive, while military and executive branch resources were redirected to quell escalating domestic unrest. Post-crash, American forces were driven out of Central and South America, and a new union of independent Central American nations formed. The U.S. was driven out from all territory except the Panama Canal Zone, where U.S. forces remained while enduring continuous guerrilla resistance. By the late 1990s, corporate greed and misguided policy had pushed the environment into crisis. Acid rain and climate shifts ravaged agriculture, leading to the Midwest Dust Bowls of 1998. Most farms failed. By 2000, Fertile regions in California, Texas, and Florida were economically desolate. A toxic spill in 1997 decimated the Pacific Northwest's salmon population, collapsing local industries. Also in 1997, the Mid-East meltdown unfolded. A nuclear exchange between countries in the Middle East and North Africa turned vast regions of land, including Iran, Iraq, Libya, Chad, and the Arab Emirates, into radioactive wastelands. Fallout from the blasts spread globally. Oil production dropped by half, causing prices to soar. The war also led to significant losses of American military forces in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, largely due to catastrophic intelligence failures. All of this occurred on the heels of the previous year's presidential change. On August 17, 1996, President Allen was assassinated while campaigning in California. Vice President Harold Harrison Hunt, whom many believe orchestrated the killing, assumed the presidency. A ruthless tactician and ally of the Gang of Four, Hunt presided over a shattered nation. With civil authority collapsing outside Washington, the military was recalled to restore order, and martial law was enforced. Cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco were placed under strict curfews. The Houston incident marked one of the darkest moments of this era, as over 2,000 civilians were killed in an artillery strike ordered by the gang. Federal control of urban areas was increasingly managed by various government agencies, such as the DEA, INS, and federal prisons, as well as corporate paramilitary groups. Local governments resisted, sparking clashes between state militias and federal forces. As violence intensified, more states began severing ties with Washington. New York and Texas led the way by halting tax payments. When federal forces occupied San Francisco, a battle broke out between residents and the government. The state's National Guard sided with the locals, and California formally declared independence after resisting an attempted seizure of Sacramento by federal paramilitary units. The U.S. military, already disillusioned with the Gang of Four, refused to intervene in the secession crisis. States continued to break away, declaring themselves free states. The military ignored the gang's orders to restore federal control, effectively cementing the fragmentation of the United States. To regain public support, the gang launched a new war in 2003, invading Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. The mission failed disastrously, claiming thousands of American lives. In the same year, investigative journalist Tesla Johansson published leaked NSA records revealing the gang's role in the earlier Central American conflict. Outrage exploded, and soon after, armed mobs, supported by military defectors and corporate mercenaries, stormed the capital. The gang fled, but most were hunted down, some captured, others killed. President Hunt met a brutal end, burned alive by a mob in the Florida swamps. With the Speaker of the House incapacitated and others in line for succession declining the role, Secretary of Defense John Seward became president. The downfall of the Gang of Four cleared the way for long overdue reforms. Some stability returned in 2008 with the first post-collapse election, but the trauma of the global financial collapse and the rise of corporate power had deeply eroded trust in governments worldwide. This instability eventually led to the outbreak of the Fourth Corporate War in 2021, after which international trade, the US and Japanese governments, and the network all fell, forcing the world to begin rebuilding from the ground up. Among those seeking to rebuild in the aftermath of the collapse of the United States was Richard Knight, a prominent entrepreneur who, during the early 1990s, grew increasingly alarmed by the escalating violence and chaos leading up to the collapse. Believing he was uniquely equipped to address the challenges ahead, Knight had worked extensively on corporate-backed ventures with the firm Halsey, Ferris and Knight, a company known for its controversial reputation. However, driven by a personal vision, he eventually broke away to establish his own development enterprise, Knight International. His goal was bold: to design and construct a model city, a fully planned, self-reliant urban environment immune to the destruction overtaking the rest of the world. The city would be fortified against criminal threats and structured to ensure safety and stability. It would feature culturally distinct neighborhoods to preserve international traditions and identities, alongside a sleek, cutting-edge corporate district symbolizing the promise of modern capitalism. Ambitious and forward-thinking, Richard Knight's dream was nothing short of revolutionary. In time, Knight succeeded in acquiring the massive amount of funding required to launch this ambitious project. Following the collapse, numerous corporations were eager to create their own controlled urban zones, areas without crime, poverty, or debt. These would be corporate-governed cities where business interests faced no resistance, and zoning could be optimized for maximum growth. The vision was to create a capitalist hub of opportunity. Knight's proposed city perfectly aligned with these goals, and while he offered the design and construction expertise, the corporations contributed the financial support. By 1992, Arasaka, EBM, and Petrochem had all joined the initiative, forming what came to be known as the Coronado Partnership. To develop the infrastructure he envisioned, Knight needed a vast amount of land with direct access to seaports and major highways to handle the large volume of construction materials. He dispatched scouting teams to explore both the east and west coasts of the US. Late in 1992, a short article in the San Francisco Chronicle caught his attention. It reported a grim event in a quiet coastal town named Morro Bay, located along central California. Rather than focusing on the tragedy, Knight recognized a unique opportunity. With Morro Bay largely abandoned, he was able to acquire the land at a minimal cost, setting the stage for his grand endeavor. Petrochem played a key role in the land acquisition as it already held drilling rights in part of the area and had taken control of the abandoned Dynergy power plant in the town, with intentions to develop an offshore port and oil terminal. A leveraged deal worth $132 million allowed for the purchase of the remaining land parcels, including sections of nearby Los Osos. With financial backing from Merrill, Asukaga and Finch, Knight and Petrochem brought in the Arasaka Corporation to eliminate the gang presence there and secure the area for construction. Additional funding came from outside investors, drawn in by the potential for profitable construction contracts and less conventional revenue streams. To distance the project from the negative associations tied to the Morro Bay incident, the group rebranded the region as Del Coronado Bay, paving the way for the development of Coronado City. Nonetheless, due to the dominant influence of its founder, locals soon began referring to it informally as Night City. By 1993, the development plans for Coronado City demanded more land than the bay's original geography could provide. To address this, the partnership flattened nearby hills and used the material as landfill, extending the narrow western sand spit to nearly 10 miles in width. The harbor was also redredged to accommodate the massive ships required for construction, with the extra soil used to expand the bay's western edge. The site was further considered a prime location for a future maglev station. Coronado City came to embody Knight's distinct and varied vision. Rather than a uniform expanse of glass and steel, the city was divided into neighborhoods, each featuring its own architectural style and theme. Inspirations ranged from iconic North American cities like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and Boston, to stylized brownstones and Victorian-inspired homes. Asian-themed districts reflected their respective cultural aesthetics, and the design emphasized walkability, with shops, restaurants, and services close to residential areas. A massive complex in the area known as New Harbor was designated for a stadium and a premier shopping mall. A marina was planned for private boats and leisure activities, while the main industrial ports would be situated to the city's north and south. Knight also honored the memory of Morro Bay by replicating parts of its original layout as an open-air seaside village. The central business and corporate districts were to feature soaring high-rises and green spaces, showcasing Knight's architectural talent through the striking design of corporate towers, structures that would come to symbolize the city's growing prosperity. Construction officially commenced on May of 1994. While Petrochem and Merrill, Asukaga, and Finch were the primary financial backers of the Coronado Partnership, they lacked the capability to handle large-scale construction themselves. This gap led to the involvement of organized crime groups who could supply the necessary machinery, manpower, and logistical control to get the city built. For years, West Coast crime syndicates such as the Mafia, Yakuza, and others dominated the region's heavy construction sector. They held influence over construction and transport unions, as well as the regulatory agencies responsible for permits, environmental reviews, and other essential approvals. Though shell companies, these organizations funneled large investments into the partnership, aiming not only for significant profits from construction contracts but also to secure future control over vice operations like gambling and trafficking within the city. However, Knight's vision relied heavily on cutting-edge building techniques and materials developed by his own firm, Knight International, methods that bypassed many of the union-controlled construction outfits linked to his new partners. This exclusion angered the syndicate, and Knight's determination to create a safe, crime-free city only deepened the tension. At first, Knight managed to largely keep mob-controlled entities out of the city's core development, but over the first 4 years of construction, he faced constant threats, which eventually escalated to acts of sabotage and intimidation. In response, Knight turned to his corporate allies, who acted decisively to neutralize the threat. Despite his efforts and the backing of powerful partners, Knight's fortune ultimately failed him. On September 20th of 1998, Richard Knight was assassinated in his penthouse atop the newly completed Parkview Tower. His killer was never identified. In tribute, the city's new governing council officially renamed Coronado City to Night City in his honor. The public's outcry to Richard Knight's assassination, combined with resistance to the growing influence of organized crime, helped maintain a degree of stability in Night City. 1 year after her husband's death, Miriam Knight reorganized his company and established Knight's Foundation, dedicated to preserving and advancing Richard's original vision for the city. This organization would later evolve into Knight Corporation. The years that followed were marked by unrest as various factions vied for dominance over the still developing metropolis. The crime syndicates, widely suspected of orchestrating Knight's murder, began seizing control over large portions of the city. Between 1998 and 2000, Night City's infamous combat zone emerged, a direct result of corporations and mob forces dividing the city's assets among themselves. The Night City Police Department lost nearly all control, rendering it ineffective in these contested areas. In the city's southern suburbs, gangs backed by corporate and criminal sponsors took root. Over time, they became so deeply entrenched that the only viable solution seemed to be complete demolition and redevelopment. Although there were serious conversations about sealing off the area entirely, no government or corporate body was willing to commit to such a large-scale effort. Over time, Night City became increasingly divided, with corporations maintaining control over the corporate center, while organized crime took hold of many service industries and other sections of the city. By 2005, the mob had become the dominant power around Del Coronado Bay, with most corporations focused on their operations in outlying corporate enclaves, often referred to as Beavervilles, and their fortified towers in Corporate Plaza. they showed little interest in managing the city itself. In their absence, the city council struggled to function, lacking both the authority and the force needed to govern effectively without corporate backing. While the mob was highly effective in its own sphere, it was never equipped to run an entire urban center. Between 2005 and 2009, the city's government became increasingly corrupt, with many officials handpicked by organized crime groups. Even major backers like Petrochem and Merrill Asukage and Finch found themselves pushed aside as the focus shifted to fast, illicit profits. Mobs sold off city contracts to their allies, expanded drug and extortion operations, and brought in the worst elements left in the wake of the collapse. What had once been a forward-looking, modern city quickly deteriorated into a battleground. By 2009, crime, narcotics, prostitution, rampant violence, and cyber terrorism had become the norm, and the name Night City had taken on a far darker and more ominous meaning. These years marked one of the darkest chapters in Night City's history. Between 2005 and 2009, the city experienced more homicides than most urban centers recorded in a decade. The mob ruled without restraint, crushing anything that stood in its path. Gang violence surged to unprecedented levels, with groups like the Blood Raisers and the Slaughterhouse rising to prominence. Night City descended into chaos, a war-torn landscape where car bombings were as common as petty theft. The Night City Police Department's backlog of unsolved murders climbed into the thousands. After 4 years of escalating street violence, the corporations surrounding the city decided to intervene. From 2009 to 2011, a brutal conflict known as the Mob War unfolded. The corporations didn't act out of civic duty. They acted because their business interests were under threat. Organized crime had grown into a rival force with its own ambitions, and those didn't align with corporate objectives. If the mob wouldn't follow corporate rule, they would be met with corporate firepower. Private military contractors and Arasaka-trained paramilitary units equipped with assault vehicles, tanks, and combat aerodynes launched a coordinated campaign of bombings, targeted killings, and direct assaults. The mob, unprepared for this level of warfare, was swiftly dismantled. By the end of the fighting, the corporations had eradicated organized crime's grip on Night City. From then on, any criminal syndicate that dared to challenge corporate power would be forced to play by corporate terms. In 2011, following the end of the mob war, the corporations moved to solidify control. They arranged for a puppet mayor to be elected the following year and began the process of cleaning up the city. The new city council, faced with lingering instability, granted full policing authority to corporate security forces within city limits. The corporate zones and city center were quickly restored to order, and other districts were cleaned up to varying extents. Following the political restructuring of Night City, the harsh new corporate policies deepened the city's homelessness crisis. residents who couldn't afford the newly renovated housing were forcibly evicted, leaving hundreds on the streets. Much of the affordable housing was repurposed to accommodate corporate security forces tasked with maintaining order. Over time, as the need for such a heavy security presence diminished, the situation gradually began to stabilize. In 2012, Judson Freeman was appointed mayor, a figure handpicked by the corporations to serve their interests. That same year, under the Northern Separation Treaty, Night City officially joined the Free State of Northern California, while still maintaining open access to travelers from Southern California. By 2013, the worst of Night City's chaos had been crushed under the control of the mega corporations. Basic public services such as police, fire departments, and other civic infrastructure were restored. While life under corporate rule was undeniably oppressive, for many citizens it was still an improvement over living in a war zone. In 2014, Night City was rocked by a violent conflict between rival gangs, each vying for territorial control, a period that would later be remembered as the Metal Wars. That same year, the city also saw the eruption of the homeless riots, sparked by growing displacement and inequality. The unrest was forcefully suppressed by the NCPD. During this time, a steady flow of mercenaries, hired by fixers and operating on behalf of various clients, especially megacorporations, became part of the city's everyday landscape. While corporations publicly claimed to work together for the good of Night City, behind the scenes they plotted against one another. This environment created a thriving market for edge runners who found no shortage of work in this new era of covert corporate warfare. Meanwhile, the corporations, now fully in control of city governance, ensured that new laws served their interests. Funding for municipal projects flowed almost exclusively into wealthy districts, leaving poorer areas to decay. The combat zone continued to creep outward, inch by inch, as smaller gangs operated unchecked without the oversight of the now defunct crime syndicates. The corporations paid little attention since their operations remained unaffected. For the wealthy, Night City remained relatively secure. For everyone else, survival became a daily endeavor. By 2020, Night City had grown into a sprawling, fast-developing metropolis, still plagued by street crime and violence, yet thriving economically, particularly in the corporate sector. It had become a dynamic, stylish urban hub, marked by its slick aesthetic and high energy, setting it apart from other cities. Though its violent history had left deep scars, the city had largely recovered. Corporate Plaza remained immaculate, and the NCPD had sufficient authority to maintain relative peace in the downtown core, at least during daylight hours. Still, like much of urban America, Night City had become an armed society. It wasn't unusual to see as many firearms on the streets as briefcases. While the city government retained nominal control, true order was often maintained by corporate intervention when tensions escalated. Behind closed doors, deals were struck, bribes were paid, a few lives were lost, and others were spared. Night City had strayed far from Richard Knight's original vision, but despite its flaws, it functioned. That uneasy balance was shattered during the Fourth Corporate War. In 2022, as hostilities between Militech and Arasaka escalated from covert skirmishes to open conflict, Night City was swept into the chaos. With major corporate offices and assets belonging to both megacorps located in the city, it quickly became a battleground. Its status as part of the Free State of Northern California, outside the jurisdiction of any global superpower, only made matters worse. Urban warfare broke out across the city, particularly in the corporate and city centers where both factions had a heavy presence. To fuel their proxy war, Militech and Arasaka began enlisting local mercenaries, gang affiliates, and nomadic groups. By 2023, a mass exodus from Night City was underway as residents desperately sought to escape sniper fire from drones, tank assaults, and attacks by corporate kill squads. Large portions of the city lay in ruins, driving people to flock towards safer areas like Haywood and Pacifica. Entire gangs and nomad families had been wiped out, and the mercenary community suffered heavy losses as well. Air and sea transportation faced severe disruptions, with supplies becoming scarce as corporations, governments, and local factions hoarded resources in anticipation of being drawn deeper into the conflict. Damage to critical infrastructure, such as hospitals and fuel depots, combined with soaring prices for essential goods, worsened conditions for civilians. Meanwhile, heavy weaponry became increasingly available throughout the metropolitan area, enabling many gangs and locals to arm themselves heavily. By July 2023, Arasaka had gained control over much of the city, more so than any other corporation, though the city was frequently targeted by both overt and covert Militech operations. Night City's population, from gangs and mercenaries to police, local mafias, and even the city government, largely opposed Militech. The corporation had withdrawn its forces from downtown corporate offices to more secure locations in Haywood. After the mayor resigned amid what was described as a nervous breakdown, Assistant Mayor Garvin Hawkinson assumed leadership. Arasaka favored Hawkinson, finding him far more compliant and cooperative than his predecessor. By August of 2023, Night City was fully controlled by the Arasaka Corporation, serving as their ultimate stronghold in North America and a gathering point for fleeing corporate soldiers from across the continent. CEO K. Arasaka directed his forces from Arasaka Tower, seeking to negotiate a settlement with Militech and the US government to grant Night City independence, effectively creating a corporate-run free city. The metropolis was under martial law, and several corporations had vacated their offices, which Arasaka then occupied. Meanwhile, the city was encircled by the forces from Northern California, deployed by Governor Denise de la Vega. U.S. President Elizabeth Kress, formerly Militech CEO, persuaded the governor to allow her to send an elite division of special forces and air mobile troops from the U.S. Army and Militech. These units assembled on the highlands outside the city under the command of U.S. General Patrick Eddington. Arasaka held significant leverage in the negotiations as any assault on Night City would cause extensive civilian casualties and property damage to a city crucial to Northern California's tax revenue. Rumors circulated that Arasaka planned to deploy the Soul Killer program against both the civilian population and surrounding military forces if no truce was reached. At the same time, the data crash virus was wreaking havoc on the net, leaving two major Militech shareholders and a U.S. senator in a vegetative state after connecting to it. While some blamed the virus for the net's destruction, many suspected it was actually Arasaka's Soul Killer at work. On August 20th, 2023, a Militech strike team led by Morgan Blackhand and Johnny Silverhand attempted to infiltrate Arasaka Towers to destroy the corporation's reliquary database project, which stored extensive pre-DataCrashNet data, and to erase all traces of the Soul Killer program. Their plan involved detonating a tactical nuclear device in a heavily shielded area beneath the building to contain the blast and avoid widespread destruction. However, the nuke prematurely detonated on the 120th floor of the Eastern Tower, instantly destroying the Arasaka Towers. Over 12,000 people were immediately incinerated near the towers, with more than 500,000 fatally injured, and an additional 250,000 died in the following weeks and months. This catastrophe became known as the Night City Holocaust. Since the detonation was an air blast, long-term radioactivity was somewhat reduced, with most radiation contained within the nearby skyscrapers. Because much of Night City and its surroundings were built on fill over low elevation, the blast triggered a minor earthquake that liquefied parts of the fill and flooded inner city areas. The explosion pulverized tons of concrete and steel into debris that spread across Northern California and out to sea for months, also igniting a massive firestorm covering thousands of acres beyond the city. Within 24 hours, the metropolis was barely habitable. Many Night citizens escaped the initial fallout due to cybernetic enhancements or built-in radiation filters, but the firestorm destroyed large portions of housing, forcing residents to relocate to suburbs or farther out. The seismic shaking ruptured gas mains, water pipes, and power grids, leaving streets filled with broken asphalt and wrecked vehicles. The resulting dust cloud rose high into the sky, turning it a fiery red and coloring dawn and dusk with a glowing red hue. Within hours of the disaster, then U.S. President Elizabeth Kress nationalized Militech by leveraging the authority of their CEO, General Donald Lundy, placing the organization under the direct control of the United States military. Over the next 2 years, the Fourth Corporate War finally came to an end. President Kress publicly blamed the attack on Night City on the Japanese megacorporation Arasaka, but investigations revealed that the weapon used had been supplied by a Militech strike team. Using the full force of military power and propaganda, Kress painted Arasaka as a villainous foreign corporation led by a madman intent on destroying an American city to consolidate personal power. Arasaka's operating licenses in North America were swiftly revoked. its leadership branded as terrorists, and its assets either seized or forced offshore, effectively banishing the corporation from the continent. The official narrative, pushed by Militech and the US government, was that Arasaka had detonated the nuclear device as an area denial tactic to prevent Militech from capturing the Arasaka towers. Public opinion remained divided. Some believed it was Militech's reckless eagerness to destroy Arasaka, while others thought it was Arasaka's desperate attempt to defend their headquarters. Ultimately, the true cause of the Night City nuclear detonation remained a mystery. Despite all of the political maneuvering, President Kress showed little to no interest in helping Night City recover. Like many presidents before her during the collapse, she basically wrote the city off as beyond saving and offered sanctuary in her new United States to the surviving refugees. There were two main reasons for this. First, the United States resources were already stretched to their limits, leaving few options to assist. Second, Kress saw this as a perfect opportunity to bring the rebellious Free State of Northern California back under federal control. However, Night City resisted that rule fiercely. In the years that followed, survivors of the nuclear blast did what they could to survive, searching for shelter, clean water, and food rather than trying to rebuild what was lost. Many fled the ruined city to reclaim nearby settlements abandoned during the 1990s collapse, but a large number remained in the metropolitan area. Roughly 2 million people in the greater Night City region were left homeless, either directly from the blast or from flooding. Survivors crowded into sprawling tent shantytowns in the suburbs. Local organizations like the police and fire departments collapsed completely, losing much of their infrastructure and authority. The notorious Max-Tac-C SWAT unit went rogue, dispensing justice on its own terms, while NCART lost much of its railway system. Plans to rebuild the destroyed areas seemed nearly impossible due to disrupted global manufacturing and shipping, and the collapse of the old net. Nomad clans stepped into the void to help with transportation and logistics. By 2030, it became clear that urgent action was needed. Leading the charge were Night Corp, the remnants of Night City's government, various local organizations, and the citizens themselves. They reached out to outside resources, calling in old favors from a wide range of groups, including nomad families, small corporations, and edge runners. The recovery effort was spearheaded by the Aldecaldos nomad clan alongside their allies at Stormtech Corporation. Thanks to extensive experience rebuilding cities, particularly from a project in Chicago, Stormtech and the Aldecaldos were well prepared to construct large temporary housing using shipping containers, followed by Formocrete modules transported by rail and sea. Before any of this could happen, however, the ground had to be cleared. Most of the central corporate zone had been destroyed, including government buildings. The sheer amount of wreckage was too massive to dig up and haul away to distant landfills. Instead, survivors used bulldozers and improvised main battle tanks, left abandoned by both sides of the conflict, to push debris into Del Coronado Bay, using it as fill material. This included radioactive ruins from the area known as the Hot Zone. Night Corp offered generous rewards to those who helped clean up the radioactive rubble at Ground Zero. Both the corporation and the city council claimed casualties were minimal during this process, though they never released official figures to back up that claim. Many of Night City's inner neighborhoods had already been leveled in the relentless battles before the fall of the towers. The rubble from these areas was also used as fill to build new structures and rebuild old parts of the city. By 2035, efforts to rebuild the city's ruined areas were underway, although large amounts of debris still remained. Several of the old neighborhoods had been absorbed into the newly designated combat zones, while the city's historic center remained in complete ruin. The city council had reached an agreement with major corporations to support and finance the rebuilding efforts. This initiative included development of the Glen, intended to become the new headquarters for the central government. The Pacifica Confederation, a loosely organized collection of states, focused on restoring infrastructure damaged by the war. They allowed Night City to function as a semi-independent city-state, giving it the status of a free trade zone with the Confederation and making it a gateway for international entities avoiding dealings with the US. By 2040, most Confederation cities had access to CityNets and data pools, largely due to a local Night City tech firm. The Reconstruction period solidified Night City's connection to the outside world, with officials and those in power having no desire to rejoin the United States, which had previously abandoned them. At the time, there was widespread speculation that Arasaka had been framed for the nuclear explosion, providing an opportunity to damage the corporation's reputation. It wasn't until the 2040s that the truth emerged. Trace Santiago, a young independent journalist, uncovered the real events of 2023 and published a series of exposés and books about the Fourth Corporate War. His reporting exposed the big lie, the false narrative pushed by President Kress, blaming Arasaka for the AHQ disaster, leading to its complete unraveling. The revelations significantly damaged Militech and the US government's credibility, prompting Night City to shift its alignment towards Arasaka rather than the United States. Even so, many residents still held Arasaka responsible for the nuke, or at least for drawing the conflict to Night City, as it had served as the corporation's main base in North America. Public opinion remained deeply split. Some condemned Arasaka, while others favored its return over submission to the federal US authority. Meanwhile, the Night City Council viewed the EEC and Soviet Union as agreeable trade partners, provided they respected the city's internal stability. By 2045, radiation levels had diminished significantly, though traces still lingered. Night City remained in a state of reconstruction, with increasing corporate investment, yet the city continued to struggle with severe suburban overpopulation. Thousands in the wider metro area remained without permanent housing. Many districts had been reorganized, renamed, or removed entirely, with the city effectively split into four main areas: the rebuilding urban center where most funding and development were concentrated, the overpacked suburbs, crowded with refugees, and sprawling tent settlements, the notorious combat zones, and the largely untouched hot zone located in the former city center. Ongoing supply chain disruptions slowed progress on various projects, including the revival of the above-ground N-cart lines. Still, conditions had improved compared to the immediate post-war years, and even those with limited means could manage a decent life if they had the right connections, unless they were stuck in the city's harshest areas. Since the nuclear incident, no new mayor had taken office due to post-conflict instability, though the city council appeared content with the lack of a centralized leadership. Both the police and fire services, while under strain, were gradually regaining their footing. During this turbulent period, the most dependable transportation came from nomads, particularly after the loss of the city's main airport. However, new infrastructure plans were underway in Morro Rock off the Central Coast, eventually leading to the opening of the NCX spaceport in 2047. In 2052, the radioactive remains of the hot zone were finally cleared, paving the way for the construction of a new corporate center. As megacorporations re-established their dominance, the nomad families who had played a key role in the city's rebuilding were gradually forced out, while the corporations worked behind the scenes to ensure the mayor's seat remained vacant in order to serve their interests. By the late 2050s, Night City experienced a major reconstruction boom that significantly accelerated urban development. During this period, heavy investment poured into the Pacifica district, aiming to transform it into a high-end tourist hotspot, with Militech serving as the primary backer. Following deadly bird flu outbreaks in 2051 and again in 2059, which claimed thousands of lives, the City Council enacted the Avian Extermination Act on May 4th of 2063. This law mandated the elimination of all birds within an 18-mile radius of the city, although private pet ownership was still allowed. Over time, most of the city's animal wildlife vanished as a result. By the early to mid-2060s, Night City had become a dazzling symbol of prosperity on the North American West Coast, drawing in wealth from numerous sources. Riding this wave of success, the City Council partnered with corporations to elevate Pacifica beyond a luxury resort into the world's premier tourist destination. Billions of euro dollars were funneled into the project, and construction surged forward until crises emerged, eventually causing investors to pull out and abandon Pacifica, leaving its fate in the hands of the local population. At the end of 2069, newly re-elected President Myers introduced a federal policy aimed at bringing the Free States back under national control, using national unity as justification. The majority of the fully autonomous states resisted this push, leading to open conflict between the NUSA and the Coalition of Free States, an event that came to be known as the Unification War. Night City, though part of the Free State of Northern California at the time, sought to stay out of the confrontation. With NorCal siding with the Free States and SoCal supporting the NUSA, Night City found itself caught between two opposing factions. As tensions escalated, its residents anxiously awaited a federal incursion. However, the city narrowly avoided direct involvement. In early 2070, as NUSA forces approached the city's outskirts and the council remained undecided, Councilman Lucius Rhine reached out to the long-banished Arasaka Corporation, leveraging years of personal connections. In return for lifting the ban on Arasaka's presence in the city, the corporation dispatched a supercarrier, which arrived in Del Coronado Bay just days after Rhine's request. Within hours of its arrival, federal troops withdrew. Shortly after Arasaka's direct involvement, the Arvin Accord was signed in June of 2070, officially bringing the war to an end. Concerned that Arasaka's growing influence might escalate the conflict beyond control, President Myers agreed to the treaty, despite it being unsatisfactory to all sides. Nevertheless, it was seen as the lesser evil compared to prolonging the war and risking a wider global crisis. The agreement reaffirmed Night City's status as an international autonomous free city, exempt from the authority and legal framework of both Northern California and the NUSA. Despite this independence, a new border wall was extended through the Badlands south of the city, marking it as part of a contested zone. This newfound freedom came at a high cost as it opened the door for mega corporations to tighten their grip on the city. With heavy investment, they accelerated Night City's redevelopment, aiming to solidify corporate influence along the West Coast. The defining moment of this shift came later that year when the city's administration, now including newly elected Mayor Lucius Rhine, granted Arasaka a seat on the city council and approved construction of their new American headquarters in the downtown core, on the same site where their old tower had been destroyed back in 2023. Though Night City entered another era of prosperity, the benefits were not shared equally. Following the Unification War, efforts were made by Night City and various investors to revive the Pacifica Development Project, but these plans were met with strong opposition from the local population. The NCPD attempted to forcefully clear the area, but failed. By October of 2072, fearing a violent confrontation, officials ordered police forces to withdraw. Soon after, the city council cut off all municipal services to pressure residents into leaving, an effort that ultimately did not succeed. Over time, Pacifica transformed into a new combat zone within the city. Its western section fell under the control of the enigmatic Voodoo Boys gang, while the sealed-off eastern side became known as Dogtown, dominated by the militant group Barghest. In the years that followed Arasaka's return, the corporation steadily expanded its influence across the city. They eliminated several rival firms and established two major developments, the foreboding Arasaka waterfront in Watson and a new regional headquarters in Corporate Plaza. In 2074, Night City marked its 80th anniversary. However, the year also saw a deadly cyber psycho incident in Kabuki, resulting in 3 civilian deaths. In response, President Rosalind Myers offered Militech support to protect the city's residents, an offer that drew sharp criticism from the Night City Police Commissioner. Mayor Lucius Rhine, who was up for re-election in 2077, faced a strong challenge from Councilman Jefferson Perales, a vocal critic of corporate influence. However, Rhine died unexpectedly before the election, with the cause officially listed as implant failure related to his heart. Deputy Mayor Weldon Holt assumed the role of acting mayor, and a new election was scheduled. Both Holt and Perales entered the race, along with several other unnamed candidates. In the end, Perales emerged victorious, becoming the new mayor of Night City. Now, let's have a look at the histories behind the major corporations which define the history and power structures of Night City and post-collapse America. The Arasaka Corporation is a global megacorporation engaged in corporate security, banking, and manufacturing. It ranks among the most powerful megacorporations worldwide. The company is also the leading distributor of Japanese products across American, European, and Asian markets. Weapons and military vehicles bearing the Arasaka name are highly prized by police and security organizations. Over time, the corporation has gained a notorious reputation as a feared entity that conceals its actions through assassins, extensive legal teams, and an alleged link to the Yakuza. Arasaka commands the largest and most formidable private military force of any corporation globally, with its guards known and feared internationally. Established in 1915 by Sosai Arasaka in Tokyo, Japan, the company initially focused on manufacturing and capitalized on World War II by supplying the Imperial Army. Anticipating Japan's defeat, Sosai strategically safeguarded his company's assets by distributing his wealth worldwide, beyond the reach of the post-war authorities. On August 15th of 1945, when the Emperor announced Japan's surrender and renounced his divine status, Sosai's son, Saburo Arasaka, a former Imperial Navy lieutenant, was deeply shaken. Near the point of committing seppuku, he experienced a revelation that made him understand his father's foresight. As the family heir, Saburo recognized that the wealth he would inherit could, if managed wisely, restore Japan's power and enable it to dominate globally through politics and economics. Saburo returned home, beginning his studies of politics, economics, and history. When Sosai Arasaka passed away in 1960, 41-year-old Saburo took over as head of the Arasaka Corporation. At the time, Arasaka was still a relatively small company, having only recently re-established itself in international trade. Before his death, Sosai had gradually reclaimed capital and resources kept secret during and after the war, and Saburo continued this work after assuming control. In 1970, Saburo founded the Arasaka Security Division within the corporation. This new branch focused on providing top-tier personal and corporate security, including electronic and computer protection. Over the next 25 years, Arasaka Security earned a stellar reputation as the most powerful firm of its kind worldwide. By 1990, Arasaka had entered the Global 500 list, and by the mid-1990s, Arasaka guards served thousands of influential individuals and corporations, while their intrusion countermeasures and cybersecurity experts were widely sought after. Soon, the security division became one of Arasaka's 3 strongest sectors, alongside Arasaka Bank and Arasaka Manufacturing. Saburo's commitment to his studies allowed him to predict the global market crash of 1994 and the eventual collapse of the United States. By taking strategic actions and making savvy investments, he positioned Arasaka as one of the few companies to profit from the downturn. Although already significant before the crash, Arasaka grew immensely afterwards, becoming one of the world's largest megacorporations and ranking second on the Global 500 list. By 1997, Arasaka Security had expanded into paramilitary contracting, beginning the training of one of the world's first corporate armies at their guard and agent training facility, located in the restricted northern wastes of Hokkaido. This period ushered in an era of ruthless expansion, with Arasaka eliminating or absorbing as many competitors as possible and acquiring non-competitive companies that Saburo deemed valuable assets. Arasaka's influence over the Japanese government became increasingly problematic in the late 1990s. Saburo was close to achieving near total control, with Arasaka-backed politicians holding 60% of the national diet. However, fear of Arasaka's attempted government takeover led to the formation of a coalition of Japanese corporations, both large and small, united under the banner of the Far Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, or FACS. This alliance successfully challenged Saburo's grip on government, leading to the arrest of many politicians, and they continued to thwart Arasaka's ambitions for decades to come. From 1997 to 2020, the Arasaka Corporation continued to grow and diversify. Despite the corporation's immense wealth and power, and Saburo being among the richest men globally, he remained focused on his original goals. During this time, Saburo stepped down as CEO, handing over the nominal leadership of Arasaka to his son, Kei Arasaka. Nevertheless, all major decisions and policies still required Saburo's approval, and he had carefully prepared Kei to eventually assume full control and fulfill his own ambitions. In 2013, Arasaka America suffered major terrorist attacks on its Night City headquarters. A rocker boy named Johnny Silverhand led a riot at the base of their tower, killing multiple Arasaka employees, including Tashiro, the CEO of the American branch. During this period, Arasaka partnered with Sony Corporation to co-develop the Medusa 2000, a weapon offering direct interface with a powerful multi-medium zoom lens equipped with image enhancers, telescopic and macro zoom capabilities, anti-dazzle, UV, and thermographic sensors. In 2021, the Oceanic Corporation IHAG declared bankruptcy. Both Sino and OTEC sought to acquire IHAG's stock, But their buying powers were so evenly matched that neither could gain a clear advantage. To gain the upper hand, they resorted to undermining each other's resources and sabotaging stock acquisition efforts. When this tactic alone failed, Sino's Aquacorp hired Arasaka, while OTEC enlisted Militech, as the world's two largest paramilitary corporations and longtime rivals. Arasaka saw this as a chance to weaken Militech's resources further. During this period, Saburo Arasaka came to view Donald Lundy as a genuine threat to his vision for the Arasaka Corporation. By 2022, Kei Arasaka handled much of the daily operations and key decisions related to the IHEG conflict. Treating the struggle as a standard business operation and not taking it personally, Kei nonetheless intended, in line with Arasaka tradition, to do whatever was necessary to ensure victory and would never back down from a direct challenge. With Saburo in seclusion for security reasons during the conflict, Kei held full control of the corporation. However, Saburo anticipated a grim outcome and began coordinating with General Ubo Tanaka, preparing to sacrifice major assets to secure a win. The conflict ended disastrously for Arasaka in 2023, with the death of Kei Arasaka and the destruction of Arasaka Towers in Night City by a Militech team using a mini nuke. President Kress falsely blamed Arasaka for the Night City bombing, using it to further demonize the corporation for her own political gain. In response, Arasaka's operating licenses in the United States were revoked, its members and board labeled terrorists, and its assets seized or pushed offshore. Arasaka's involvement in the Fourth Corporate War nearly caused a total collapse of the Japanese government. By officially repudiating Arasaka at the war's conclusion in 2025, Japan's national image was preserved, and Arasaka was confined to operating solely within Japan for the following decade. Even after its defeat in the Fourth Corporate War, Arasaka retained one of the world's largest corporate armed forces. Although most of its operations were confined to Japan and significantly scaled down, the corporation managed to keep the majority of its assets. By 2040, Arasaka had begun rebuilding itself, gradually regaining much of its former power. The company also worked to improve its relationship with the new United States, slowly being accepted back to resume operations. While Arasaka maintained small, unofficial operations in select NUSA regions, it continued to secretly license its troops to other firms globally, though these operatives had to wear their new employers' uniforms. The corporation's ultimate goal remained unchanged: to reclaim the political and economic dominance it once held in the 2020s. Though nominally under Saburo Arasaka's control, the corporation at this point was divided by competing factions seeking dominance. By 2045, 3 major factions vied for power, each hoping Saburo would eventually pass leadership to them. These factions were the Kiji, or Green Pheasant faction. This faction was essentially the continuation of the main line. Hanako, a recluse more focused on her net-running experiments than power, led a group of conservative technocrats who aimed to follow Saburo's original vision. They viewed Hanako as a stabilizing force to maintain the corporation's traditional order. The Taka, or Hawk faction, which was headed by Yorinobu, Saburo's second son. This faction favored a direct and uncompromising approach. Known for his stubbornness and temperament, Yorinobu's resemblances to Saburo earned him strong support among the corporation's more militant elite. However, his pro-Western views and controversial innovative ideas weakened his backing among the board's traditional loyalists. And finally, the Hato, or Dove faction, which was centered around Michiko Arasaka, Kei's daughter, and Saburo's granddaughter. This liberal wing sought significant reforms. Although the smallest of the three factions, this faction had popularity among certain politicians and media figures. Several smaller factions existed within Arasaka, but none held the influence or authority of the main three. Despite the internal divisions, Arasaka's global influence remained intact, and the corporation continued to dominate in the post-rebuild era. During the Unification War between 2069 and 2070, which saw conflict between the NUSA and the Free States, Arasaka supported Night City. This regained them favor and led to their return in 2070, invited back by City Councilman Lucius Rhine. Arasaka arrived in Coronado Bay aboard their supercarrier, just as NUSA forces prepared for invasion. Fearing further instability, the NUSA withdrew their forces. Following this, Arasaka was once again welcomed into the Americas and began rebuilding its American headquarters in Night City. Having regained much of its former power, the corporation reestablished itself fully in Night City. Militech International Armaments is a megacorporation specializing in weapons manufacturing and private military contracting. Militech is one of the world's largest manufacturers of weapons and military vehicles, with facilities on every continent. Militech provides equipment for numerous nations, as well as both private and governmental organizations, especially the NUSA military and police forces. The equipment includes, but is not limited to, personal firearms, drones, tanks, aircrafts, ships, and assisted combat personal armor. Founded initially in 1996 by Italian weapons designer Antonio Lucchesi as Armatech Lucchesi International, Militech began its journey with the 1998 trials for a new standardized U.S. infantry assault weapon. Despite continued bankruptcy and ongoing recovery from the economic collapse of 1994, the U.S. government decided the time had come to replace the M16A2. The trials ultimately revealed the finalists, the FN SAP, a cheap but clunky and unreliable weapon, considered mainly due to powerful ties between the company Fabrique International and the U.S. government, as well as its ammunition and parts compatibility with other weapons of the by then defunct NATO alliance. The Colt AR-17X, a good but expensive weapon, and a submission by newcomer Armatech Lucchesi International, a compact, reliable, and moderately priced rifle. United States Marine Corps General Donald Lundy, a member of the Joint Chiefs overseeing the trials, was quickly sold on the Armatech system, assessing it as being the best combination of price, reliability, sturdiness, and accuracy. Unfortunately, due to the collapse of the US economy and near collapse of the government, the national defense budget had not only tightened but also become insidiously coupled with industry influence that had crept into the political infrastructure, and, in spite of General Lundy's protests, the contract for the new US infantry weapon system went to FN. In 2003, during the Second South American conflict, US soldiers had been dying in the thousands, equipped with unreliable sap rifles, terribly suited for the tropical climate. Lundy had observed this from afar, however, having resigned from the Marine Corps shortly after the trials of 1998 to become the CEO of Armatech at the request of Lucchese. As a former Pentagon chief, he possessed a profound understanding of the modern military-industrial complex, including the extent to which older military contracting corporations had become incredibly bureaucratically top-heavy, often touting shoddy and overpriced products that sold through contractual inertia alone. Lundy saw an opportunity for streamlined and efficient military manufacturing, producing high-quality, modern equipment at competitive prices, with the capability to sell technology in the global market, regardless of political convention. This pitch, coupled with Lucchese's brilliance in weapons design, allowed Armatech to acquire the capital needed to propel the company into a period of rapid expansion. Armatech's new world prominence and overt visibility came with a new name in 2002, Militech Arms International. The corporation's first major success came in 2004. Given the disaster represented by the Central American Wars, the US finally scrapped the FN SAP and began new trials for a standardized infantry assault weapon. The resulting choice was the Militech Ronin light assault rifle, and, shortly afterwards, Militech also won the military sidearm contract, directly resulting in sales of these weapons in vast quantities around the globe to nations and corporations alike. At the same time, Militech had begun development of heavy weapon systems, artillery, armored vehicles, and aircraft. This greatly expanded catalog, coupled with the brand's moderate prices and excellent quality, enabled the company to take on several key contracts, winning them over established defense manufacturers that had operated through and beyond the economic collapse. By the mid-2010s, Militech was the largest defense contractor in several countries, including the US, as well as being utilized by a number of corporations, all of which allowed the company to absorb a number of its now failing competitors in order to incorporate their designers and resources. However, despite great success, Militech suffered from internal problems. While Donald Lundy's leadership or executive abilities were never in question, the board of directors did not see him in a favorable light. Lundy was power-hungry and did not hide it. He was determined to make Militech the largest military, economic, and political force in the world. During this time, Lundy would often put up the corporation and himself against the Japanese conglomerate Arasaka. This increased tensions between the corporations, with many fearing a corporate war could break out. These decisions left the various members of the corporation in disagreement, Even Lundy's friend and ally, Colonel Emil Lazarus, did not favor this choice of direction. By 2020, an ex-president of Militech, Elizabeth Kress, became the President of the United States, benefiting the corporation. However, Lundy became increasingly paranoid of those who opposed him. In 2021, during the escalation of conflict between rival Aquacorps, Sino and OTEC, Militech's defense forces were contracted as supplementary support for OTEC's security forces, as well as to provide advisors, weapons, and supplies. Initially, Militech's ambitions in this conflict were not to directly engage in combat with Arasaka, but to advertise and demonstrate the efficacy of their defense services in the world market. However, to Donald Lundy, it was a matter of pride to defeat the Japanese and Saburo Arasaka. By the end of 2021, both OTEC and Sino were engaged in naval warfare, both above and below the surface, as Arasaka and Militech conducted early covert operations. Lundy considered Militech to be at war, and being a soldier for much of his life, could only view Militech's victory as Arasaka's total defeat. The Ocean War between Sino and OTEC officially ended in February of 2022, with a peace accord signed on the 27th of that month. Only 7 days later, on March 6, Arasaka conducted a live trial of the newly completed Soul Killer 2.5, capturing the engram of a Militech executive, the interrogation of whom led to an Arasaka strike on Militech's Night City offices. During the fall of 2022, following worldwide conflict and warring overspill from the corporate conflict, governments began reining in the two megacorporations. On August 20th, 2023, a Militech strike team, including infamous characters Johnny Silverhand, Rogue, Spider Murphy, and Shaitan, entered the Arasaka Towers from its rooftop and deployed the infamous small nuclear weapon within Saburo's office. The new United States, led by President Elizabeth Kress, declared martial law in the parts of the country still under their control. She blamed Arasaka for the mini-nuke detonated in Night City, but rumors persisted that Militech had funded the strike team and supplied them with the portable nuclear device. Kress, despite the public demands to hold Militech responsible, never addressed the concerns. Instead, she nationalized Militech and used them to strengthen their federal rule. Some of the most prominent and exonerated Militech officials were offered lucrative positions in the reformed NUS Department of Defense. This didn't go over well with Militech's hot-headed CEO, Donald Lundy. Even as the megacorp labored under the control of Washington, D.C. as a nationalized corporate asset, Militech secretly was rebuilding back to its former role as a combination of arms manufacturer and mercenary army. Despite heavy wartime losses, Militech remained one of the world's largest producers and sellers of all manner of military weapons, as well as a major military supplier to what was the reuniting new United States and its largest customer. Donald Lundy remained in power and one of the most influential people on the board of directors. However, he didn't own enough stock to control the corporation. Yet, his force of personality, allies, and success record had kept him on top, despite the internal struggles. As of 2077, in Night City, Militech is considered the second biggest and best corporation to work for, in part due to giving its employees up to 50% discounts on all Militech weapons. The Lazarus Military Operations Group, commonly known as the Lazarus Group, is a megacorporation wholly dedicated to private military contracting, conducting operations worldwide, ranging from single operatives to entire armored divisions. The idea for the Lazarus Group originated with Nelson Katsoudalos, a wealthy heir who foresaw the need for a mercenary organization offering high-quality services to discerning clients in the 21st century. Katsoudalos envisioned a mercenary force superior in caliber to typical mercenary outfits or corporate military units of his time. Though inexperienced in military leadership, he sought out the right person to lead the group. He hired Emil Lazarus, a former U.S. Army Special Forces colonel and Medal of Honor recipient, whose renowned name was also used to brand the corporation. Katsoudalos remained a silent partner, managing corporate finances. In 2010, Lazarus opened its first training facilities. The initial cohort consisted of 5,000 recruits who underwent 8 weeks of intensive training from experts in tactics and equipment. Throughout the 2010s, the Lazarus Group expanded rapidly. Auxiliary training centers, recruitment offices, and corporate headquarters were established across the United States and internationally. The corporation also built specialty training schools worldwide for troops and operatives. Katsoudalos and Lazarus maintained close oversight, ensuring financial discipline and upholding high standards in military procurement and training. By 2045, Lazarus Security was considered the heir to Arasaka and Militech's status as the largest security service in Night City. Lazarus employs thousands of rent-a-cops who patrol urban areas, office blocks, and upscale living districts. The Lazarus Group's reputation, continued success, and income depended on contracting military services across numerous disciplines and diverse conditions. In short, it is a versatile mercenary force, providing soldiers and special agents for hire to people or organizations that lack the resources, need, or time to recruit and maintain a full-timed armed force. The variety of military services offered by Lazarus is considerable. Force sizes range from single specialized solos and small special operations teams to entire infantry divisions that can be leased wholesale. A variety of expertise and equipment are available as options. Katsoudalos' goal when founding the Lazarus Group was simply to establish a profitable corporation catering to the military contracting niche. All expansion and diversification of the company have occurred purely because market analysis showed it would eventually increase profits. Katsoudalos has no ulterior motives beyond growing his fortune. However, he will go to great lengths to ensure the Lazarus Group's continued success, including pressuring competitors out of business and engaging in covert black operations. Emil Lazarus's goal was to create and implement a military organization that was efficient, competently run, and worthy of his pride. Since Lazarus commands all the group's military forces and oversaw their creation, he has been largely successful Lazarus troops, agents, and commanders are competent, battle-worthy, and honorable in the field. Morale remains high among the troops, and a Lazarus Group uniform commands respect throughout the global military community. Lazarus continues to keep a tight rein over his forces, ensuring standards remain high and operational success is the norm. Needless to say, a corporation that earns its keep through military action and the analysis of other organizations' military capabilities is bound to make a few enemies. Lazarus is fairly scrupulous about what contracts it takes, attempting to avoid military confrontations with corporations that have the power to take serious retribution. Fortunately, that is a rare limitation. Among the corporations that Lazarus has crossed swords with are Arasaka, Net 54, Orbital Air, and Petrochem. The group's staunchest corporate ally is Militech, from whom it annually purchases millions of dollars worth of military equipment. Several nations across Southeast Asia, Africa, South and Central America, and even Europe have run afoul of Lazarus mercenaries. Chief among them are Burma, Italy, Spain, Libya, the Congo, South Africa, Venezuela, and Colombia. As of 2077, the Lazarus Group stands as the largest and most successful specialty military contracting organization globally. Its reputation remains stellar, with over 250,000 troops either on active duty or in rapid response services. Network 54, also known as Net 54 or N54, is an American media megacorporation that broadcasts throughout the NUSA. Network 54 began in 1991 as a cable news service called Cable News 54, modeled after CNN. It quickly gained a reputation for tough, accurate, and hard-hitting journalism, giving CNN and C-SPAN serious competition. Cable News 54's quality journalism brought spectacular success, enabling the company to diversify and expand. As a fledgling corporation, CN54 acquired several smaller cable networks and pioneered the early development of new broadcasting and production technologies. The real breakthrough came in 1998 when CN54 purchased the struggling NBC, expanding its reach from cable to broadcast airwaves. With the acquisition, Cable News 54 rebranded as Network News 54, under the leadership of a young programming prodigy named Howard Wong. Net 54 diversified into a wide range of entertainment programming, becoming the first media corporation to hold major control over both cable and broadcast domains. Although it maintained its reputation for outstanding journalism, the word news in the name became more of a stylistic choice than a literal description. This expansion gave Net 54 the financial resources to compete with dedicated technology companies in developing new media tech. Prior to the NBC acquisition, Net 54's research and development efforts had been small-scale and largely theoretical. Its broadcast and production facilities relied mostly on established technology imported from companies like Sony, Microtech, and Nippon Gaki. After reaching financial maturity, Net54 used profits from its broadcasting, advertising, recording, and other divisions to fund the creation of a new subsidiary, International Media Technologies, also known as IMT. IMT was extremely well funded by its parent company, granting it virtually unlimited freedom to pursue any promising developments. This investment paid off handsomely for Net54. 3 IMT departments in particular received special attention. The first was a think tank where prominent research and analysis teams focused on predicting technological trends and identifying promising avenues. The second was the Technology Research Department, where actual laboratory work took place. The third was the Special Operations Department, which conducted industrial espionage and the extraction of competitors' researchers and executives. As a result, Net54 became the first media corporation with a robust in-house technology research and development capability, while other media corporations still relied on purchasing technology from outside companies, making them slower to adapt. Net54's head start established it as the dominant force in media tech innovation. Although competitors eventually caught up, Net54 has remained at the cutting edge, with most media corporations following its lead. The first major disruption caused by Net54 through IMT research occurred in the venerable newspaper industry. In 2002, Net54 revolutionized how Americans received their daily news, initially targeting subscribers who received printed news at home. Net54 offered a program where, for a low monthly fee, individuals could access a news database via the phone system, and later the internet. This allowed them to retrieve text and photographs from any Net54-owned newspaper on their television or home computer, with a printed hard copy available on demand. Shortly thereafter, a small portable unit was introduced that could store several thousand pages of print and photos in RAM and project them onto a small flat screen. With an inexpensive home attachment, subscribers to Net54 printed news service could transfer whatever information they wanted from their home decks and take it with them on their commute. Additionally, traditional newspaper vending boxes were replaced with small stations where subscribers could plug in their news decks to receive free updates and the text of any paper carried on the service. For a quarter or two, non-subscribers who owned compatible deck types or laptop computers could purchase the same information. Modern digitized newspaper and magazine services are simply refined versions of this process. After the net came into being and other companies joined the trend, the system evolved into its present form. Anyone owning a standard, portable personal computer deck can copy the news or magazines by paying the appropriate fee at automated newsstands and plugging in their unit. For home subscribers, things have remained much the same, except that multiple companies now offer services competing with Net54. Consequently, the traditional printed newspaper has largely faded into oblivion, although those who prefer reading on newsprint can still get fax-style output from the automated stands. Expanding from its television roots, Net54 established a foothold in the music industry in 2005 by introducing sound chips. Popular with interface-equipped youths of the 2020s, these are small ROM chips available in vending machines, stores, promotional giveaways, and even cereal boxes. Commercial chips typically contain 1 to 3 songs, along with an obligatory advertisement. The chips are inexpensive because, unlike reflex chipware, they are one-way and do not interact directly with the user's brain. Despite their ventures into music recording, print services, and radio, video technology has always been Net54's core strength. They remain, first and foremost, a broadcast corporation, and most of their development efforts are focused there. With 25% of the nation's total broadcasting power, contracts for all the hottest stars and shows, and the best news department in professional media, it seemed like nothing could threaten Net54's dominance. However, in 2005, Net54 programming genius Howard Wong was wooed away by a staggering offer from an upstart media corp out of Los Angeles. As new CEO, Wong shrewdly annexed a series of key stations, industries, and bureaus worldwide, turning the previously inconsequential Diverse Media Systems into Net54's only real competition. Threatened for the first time in its history, Net54 reacted fiercely. What followed was a furious and often destructive race to consolidate the few remaining independent stations and communication industries. In 2009, in one of the first classic corporate extractions, Net54 kidnapped Howard Wong from DMS's headquarters. DMS shot down the aircraft escaping with Wong, killing him rather than let him fall back into Net54's hands. Net54 claimed DMS shot the plane down to prevent Wong's repatriation, but DMS's legal department countered that Wong could never have been used by Net54 in a leadership role, since he was still legally under contract with DMS, suggesting Net54 purposefully killed him to cast suspicion on their rival. This sparked a series of retaliatory extractions and assassinations on both sides, nearly escalating into a full-blown corporate war. Over time, the rivalry between DMS and Net54 shifted from the battlefield to the boardroom, with each company competing to outdo the other in new technologies, series, stars, and breaking major news stories. The race to acquire smaller companies continued relentlessly. In 2077, Network News 54's Night City regional office is situated in the downtown area. N54 remains one of the 2 main channels in the new United States. It is known for a noticeable pro-Militech bias, contrasting with its rival, WNS, which tends to favor Arasaka. Diverse Media Systems, or DMS for short, is the second largest media corporation in the world, trailing only Network News 54. The two have frequently clashed, both on the battlefield and in the boardroom. DMS was involved in a joint venture to create and distribute the first brain dances. Diverse Media Systems was founded in 1998 in post-collapse Los Angeles by former Columbia Records executive James Houghton II. Bored by what he saw as entertainment media's predictable, cliche-ridden evolution, Houghton recognized the potential of emerging technologies and social structures. He envisioned a corporation built from the ground up to capitalize on these new opportunities. That was the plan on paper, at least. By the time DMS was getting started, Network 54 was already established as the dominant force in the media sphere. Net 54 executives typically viewed creative media startups as prime acquisition targets. Their aggressive hostile takeover strategy was propelling them towards dominance. However, Houghton anticipated this. When Net 54 made its first overtures, Houghton firmly refused to become a subsidiary. When Net 54 ignored his protests and launched a full-scale hostile takeover bid, Houghton responded with a move that defined their relationship for over 2 decades. He sent an envelope to the Net 54 boardroom containing enough blackmail material to ruin 4 marriages, destroy 3 prominent political careers, including, rumor has it, the presidency, and result in at least 6 indictments for offenses ranging from theft and conspiracy to murder to possible treason. Net 54 quietly quashed its takeover bid within 24 hours. Meanwhile, DMS brought back a substantial portion of its own stock at a greatly reduced price, doubling Houghton's personal fortune. Houghton had firmly etched himself into Net 54's collective memory, and a fierce feud was born. Many rank the corporate rivalry between Net 54 and DMS as second only to the legendary feud between Arasaka and Militech due to its far-reaching implications. Once DMS established its independence, it set about building the media corporation of the future. Houghton invested heavily in developing media technologies, improving existing systems like cable television, and introducing entirely new products such as Braindance and the video music chip format. With aggressive marketing and the support of hardware manufacturers eager to launch new entertainment equipment, DMS rapidly became a dominant force in cutting-edge entertainment. By 2008, under the visionary leadership of CEO Howard Wong, DMS had developed extensive holdings in concert promotion, recorded music and music videos, movie and braindance production, and, of course, network television. Although it owns fewer stations than rival Network 54, DMS produces more successful television shows, movies, braindance titles, records, and multimedia products than any other company. It has maintained the cutting-edge image that drives sales to younger consumers. In other words, DMS is still cool. However, internal tension was not foreign to the media conglomerate. Shortly after Howard Wong's death, a power struggle erupted between DMS founder Jonathan Houghton and his son John III. John III was disturbed by what he saw as executive complacency following Wong's tragic passing. In a boardroom battle, Johnny Houghton seized control from his father, who subsequently retired to Palm Springs and rarely speaks publicly. Johnny Houghton immediately put his own stamp on DMS by stepping up internal research on new media technologies, aggressively pursuing corporate espionage and black operations, and intensifying the conflict with Network 54. Recognizing the publicity and espionage value of open conflict, Johnny rapidly escalated the feud back into a shooting war. The tense relationship continued into the year 2077. As of 2077, DMS stands at the pinnacle of the media world alongside Network 54 as one of the two major global media corporations. They maintain an aggressive and hostile stance and are widely feared by smaller companies. The rivalry between DMS and Network 54 has polarized smaller media corporations, many of which seek shelter by aligning themselves with one of the big two. Truly independent, smaller media companies are thus rare. Consolidated Agriculture Corporation, commonly known as ConAg, is a major agribusiness headquartered in Kansas City, specializing in the production and global distribution of high-quality food products. The company's origins date back to 1930, when 3 Missouri-based feed mills united to create Greater Kansas City Mills, or GKCM. Initially focused on serving the Kansas-Missouri region, GKCM began to expand into other states by the mid-1940s. In the 1950s, GKCM diversified its offerings beyond animal feed, branching into grain-based goods. This included innovations like Stay Fresh bread and instant muffin mix. By 1957, the company had established a feed mill in California, and in 1960, it entered the red meat and processed meat market through the acquisition of Blue Ribbon Butcher's Choice Meats. By the mid-1960s, GKCM also began producing farm equipment and livestock care products, though these divisions were later sold to National Harvester. In 1968, the company rebranded as United Agricultural Companies Incorporated. During the 1970s, the company relocated its headquarters to San Francisco. Shortly after, it acquired several poultry businesses and expanded its grain farming operations internally, particularly into Australia. In 1973, the company sold off its trucking division and adopted a shorter name, Consolidated Agriculture. The 1980s marked a significant period of growth for ConAg. The company evolved into one of the most diverse agricultural product suppliers globally, with early investments in genetically modified soy and corn yielding substantial returns. In 1981, ConAg reached a sales milestone of $1 billion. However, by 1990, the company was struggling, burdened by excess production, bureaucratic inefficiency, and overexpansion. This led to a sweeping corporate restructuring involving mass layoffs, divestment of non-core and unprofitable divisions, and a wave of executive terminations. Escalating operational costs prompted the company to return its headquarters to Kansas City in 1996. ConAg was also among the first to license CHOOH2 fuel production from Biotechnica, which helped stabilize its financial standing. In the early 2000s, biofuel profits funded the company's cautious rebound. A pivotal move came in 2005 with the acquisition of Sea Beef a small Australian company specializing in algae-based synthetic meat. By 2010, as its CHOOH2 license expired, ConAg had grown into the world's largest producer of imitation meats based on soy, kelp, and algae. Much of ConAg's aggressive strategy in the 2010s is credited to CEO Barry the Butcher Swiftsure, who took over in 2014. Under his leadership, ConAg acquired two fast food chains, Hamburger and D Noodles, and scaled them dramatically from fewer than 20 outlets each to 157 and 198 locations, respectively. Further expansion came with the 2017 and 2018 acquisitions of Moscow Grain's flour operations, increasing ConAg's portfolio to a total of 35 flour and feed mills. Petrochemical Associates International is a megacorporation specializing in the petrochemical industry. It is the world's largest producer of the synthetic alcohol fuel CHOOH2, the dominant fuel source of the mid-21st century. Petrochem controls millions of acres of arable land across the NUSA and ranks as one of the largest oil producers, second only to Sov Oil. With fossil fuel reserves dwindling, most remaining oil is now reserved for producing plastics and other synthetics. Petrochem's vast fertile oil fields make it a prime target for rivals seeking to seize its wealth and resources. The roots of Petrochem's dominance begin with a man named Trenton Parker. Many years ago, Trenton Parker walked across the desert, surrounded by monuments to his family's former glory. Giant oil pumps dotted the plains as far as the eye could see, once moving in a relentless, rhythmic dance, extracting precious oil from the depths of the earth. To Trenton, those machines had seemed eternal, drawing fuel from an endless reservoir that would never run dry. He had been young and naive then, living off the wealth of a family accustomed to staggering, uninterrupted income. But over the years, one by one, the machines ground to a halt. The oil vanished. The pipelines to the refinery and shipping ports ran dry. Some oil still flowed from Texas, and a trickle came from the Parker family's company, but it was minimal. Oil was now transported by truck to refineries, used almost exclusively for chemicals and synthetics. Many former oil fields had been turned over to cattle or abandoned, becoming home to nomad tribes or lying desolate. Yet the Parker family's fortune was far from over. They owned large tracts of arable land, and thanks to the foresight of Trenton's father, Lewis, they had made a shrewd investment. 5 years earlier, when oil was still abundant, Lewis secured a licensing agreement with Biotechnica, a fledgling Italian genetic engineering firm. Parker Petrochemicals became the sole U.S. company licensed to cultivate Triticum vulgaris megasuavis, a genetically engineered, high-sugar wheat. This grain is fermented and catalyzed to produce the synthetic alcohol fuel CHOOH2, securing the Parker family's stake in the future of energy. 5 years of waiting had finally paid off. Since acquiring the license to grow the grain, The family had been bleeding money. For a time, it had seemed like a colossal mistake. Land lay fallow, equipment gathered dust, and expenses piled up. But then everything changed. After years of uncertainty, Ford and General Motors announced they would begin producing automobiles powered by CHOOH2 burning engines. Toyota, Honda, and other automotive giants quickly followed. Research was already underway to develop jet turbines fueled by the heavy alcohol, and shipbuilders were experimenting with it as well. CHOOH2 was poised to become the new global standard for fuel, replacing gasoline, kerosene, and countless others. And in the US, only Parker Petrochemicals produced it. Well, technically, it was his and Ellen's. Ellen Trieste had provided much of the capital to secure the Biotechnica license. The family alone didn't have enough assets to close the deal. Lewis Parker had persuaded Ellen to invest tens of millions into the venture. While the license allowed Parker Petrochemicals to cultivate the necessary grain for CHOOH2, it was Trieste who held the power over the company's fate. With a single word, she could revoke the license and plunge the family into bankruptcy. Not that she was likely to do so. Trieste stood to gain enormous returns and was one of the company's primary shareholders. The war, which eventually occurred in the South China Sea, had ended with Petrochem's defeat. Sov Oil emerged as the sole drilling power in the region and the undisputed world leader in crude oil production. Petrochem was far behind. Fortunately, they still controlled the world's largest CHOOH2 production facilities and maintained a sprawling empire of chemical and materials research and fabrication. The war had dented the company's fortune, but not fatally. A few years of slow recovery followed as Petrochem rebuilt its financial base and manpower. The war had only deepened the rift between Trenton Parker and Ellen Trieste. Ellen had been a staunch supporter of the conflict, while Trenton had vehemently opposed it. For a time, it seemed Trenton might recover his losses and wrest control of the company, but Trieste rallied her allies and thwarted a coup at the last moment. The animosity between the two shareholders intensified, yet neither could completely unseat the other, nor were they willing to risk outright confrontation. Despite everything, Petrochem had grown into a global powerhouse, leading the way in chemistry, materials research, and production. It had become the world's largest agricultural corporation and the foremost producer of CHOOH2. Though Petrochem never directly entered the Fourth Corporate War, defending its valuable oil wells and fields, and repelling sporadic Sov Oil assaults, drained the company's resources severely. Emerging from the war depleted, Petrochem nonetheless kept the global energy supply intact amid the collapse of most multinational fuel companies. To safeguard its sprawling interests and recover losses inflicted by continental brands, Petrochem had heavily invested in a private armed force comparable to a small nation's military. By 2077, Petrochem remained the world's largest CHOOH2 producer. However, in 2076, severe droughts devastated the corporation's soybean and corn crops, which were primary components in CHOOH2, causing record low yields. Governments in Brazil and Colombia, where Petrochem maintained its largest plantations, threatened to seize the harvests to quell rising famines and unrest. Despite the corporation's expert lobbyists managing to prevent these seizures, Petrochem's stock plunged 11% by the end of 2076. Soviet World Oil Industries, commonly referred to within the USSR as SGKP or Kirosov, and internationally as Sovoil, is a major petrochemical corporation headquartered in the Soviet Union. Known as the wealthiest enterprise in the Soviet Union, Sovoil wielded its considerable economic influence to manipulate and ultimately dominate the Soviet government. In 1994, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was replaced by the Union of Sovereign Soviet Republics, a newly formed alliance centered on economic collaboration. 2 years later, in 1996, Soviet Federation President Andrei Gorbachev initiated a restructuring of the country's centrally controlled oil industry. This came amid intense disputes between Soviet republics over how much authority to delegate to the Central Committee, leading to a deadlock. To break the stalemate, Gorbachev appointed Anatoly Novikova, a delegate from Siberia with ties to the Central Committee, as the director of the State Oil Industries Subcommittee. Recognizing the importance of regional representation, Novikovo brought in Yarno Kurgasin, a delegate from the oil-rich Kazakh region, as his deputy. With leadership from 2 major oil-producing areas, the subcommittee eventually succeeded in advocating for a unified Soviet oil industry, consolidating control of oil production under a single corporate entity, Soviet State Oil Industries. By 1997, the restructured Soviet oil industry faced the extensive challenge of recovering only a fraction of the vast oil reserves beneath the Federation. After extensive modernization and expansion efforts, the enterprise evolved into the Neo-Soviet Oil Combine, breaking free from the influence of Federal Central Committee oligarchs. Sitting atop the world's largest remaining oil fields, Sovoil's leadership amassed immense wealth and power, controlling a resource of unparalleled value, as well as interests in multiple other industries. However, Sovoil's dominance was increasingly threatened by technological advancements, such as Biotechnica's CHOOH2 fuel, which quickly eroded their strategic stronghold. In 2002, Sergei Kirsanov, commander of Sovoil's security forces, received orders from Novikovo to secure Sovoil's facilities. Kirsanov publicly declared that Sovoil was transitioning to a private corporation and seceding from the Soviet Union's Central Committee. Though Soviet state forces attempted to retake the company's sites, any forceful intervention risked catastrophic damage to critical oil infrastructure and supply. Consequently, the Central Committee was forced to accept Sovoil's de facto independence. Between 2002 and 2008, Sovoil rebranded itself as Soviet World Oil Industries and began actively influencing the Soviet Central Committee. Through a combination of bribes and political maneuvering, Sovoil secured economic stability within the USSR while expanding its portfolio to include CHOOH2. In the mid-2010s, Sovoil clashed with rival corporation Petrochem over contested territories in the South China Sea, sparking a brief but brutal corporate war that left both corporations significantly weakened. As a result, Petrochem shifted its focus to developing emerging CHOOH2 fuel technologies, while Sovoil concentrated on exploiting the untapped oil reserves of the remote Siberian region. Between 2012 and 2020, Sovoil continued to cement its role as the dominant economic power within the USSR. Leveraging its vast resources and influence, Sovoil had effectively turned the government into a tool serving its interests. By 2020, the Novakovo family maintained majority control of the company, which had grown into the seventh largest company worldwide, wielding such political power that the USSR was seen less as a sovereign nation and more as an extension of Sovoil's corporate empire. The Fourth Corporate War only delayed Sovoil's long-term ambitions. Behind the scenes, the corporation's central committee had been strategizing its next evolution, preparing for a future where oil was no longer the primary revenue source. To secure its survival, Sovoil prioritized diversification, expanding its economic footprint across the neo-Soviet Union and much of Eastern Europe, where it maintained a dominant market share. The company ventured into mining, shipbuilding, research, and CHOOH2-powered agriculture. It also began developing aircraft, computer technologies, synthetics, CHOOH2 energy systems, and general agricultural production. As of 2077, Petrochem claims to have developed the first genuinely environmentally friendly oil production process, promising the ability to refine oil without causing environmental damage, a potential game changer in the ongoing rivalry between the two companies. Kangtao is a prominent weapons manufacturer originally based in Taiwan and later restructured as a Chinese company. Founded during Taiwan's emergence as a manufacturing hub in the late 2000s, following its declaration of independence aided by Japan and Arasaka, Kangtao quickly rose to industry prominence among Taiwanese firms. Unlike many competitors, Kangtao maintained its independence by resisting acquisition from Japanese corporate interests. The company's firearms were distributed widely across Asia and eventually made their way to the United States. In the 2040s, Kangtao underwent a major restructuring that relocated its headquarters to China. Supported by bold strategic decisions and strong government backing, the company surged rapidly into the top tier of weapons manufacturers. By 2077, Kangtao was best known for its innovative firearms, especially its new generation of smart guns that utilized gyrojet technology to fire caseless, guided ammunition. The corporation also expanded its influence in mercenary and private security markets. Kangtao's Taiwanese division remained independent, focusing on small firearms, particularly pistols, which gained widespread popularity on Asian streets as affordable and reliable weapons favored by gangs. After the Fourth Corporate War, Asia was devastated by widespread conflict and instability. China, despite internal turmoil, seized the opportunity for rebuilding. In 2046, Kangtao's transformation accelerated with the appointment of former Army Colonel Shi Mingsu to revitalize the company, which was then burdened by debt and government subsidies. By 2050, under Zhu's leadership, Kangtao re-entered the market with its modernized, debt-free profile and the release of the A22B Chow Smart Pistol, fueled by substantial government investments in cutting-edge research facilities, Kang Tao rapidly expanded its presence in the smart weapons market. Over the next 2 decades, the company surpassed many rivals and firmly established itself as a top-tier weapon manufacturer, competing directly with giants like Tsunami Arms and Arasaka. Kang Tao is also regarded as the 4th best corporation to work for in Night City, offering employees a premium Trauma Team Gold Insurance package. However, employment comes with a strict 50-year loyalty contract. Sega Atari is a Japanese multinational company based in Tokyo, known globally as a leading video game developer and publisher. Founded by Kenji Satomi, the company expanded internationally with branches like Segatari of America and Segatari Europe, as well as being headquartered in Hong Kong, California, Taipei, and London. The firm's arcade division, once part of the main corporation, has operated independently as Segatari Interactive since 2005. Both entities are owned by Segatari Holdings. From 1983 to 2045, the company developed and sold video game consoles. Although Satomi originally aimed to create software for military computing, the company pivoted towards entertainment software in the mid-1970s, transitioning into the development of computer and arcade games. Their arcade machines gained immense popularity across Japan and were soon being shipped globally to meet demand. The success of their Segatari game centers brought in billions, and the growth of regional offices and international branches fueled advancements in robotics and virtual reality technology. Back in 2020, Segatari gained fame for their mind game titles, including Hackman 2 and Virtual Villains, both designed for the Segatari Rus virtual reality gaming platform. They were also renowned for producing elegant humanoid robots and their control software, which outperformed most competitors and were showcased in retail boutiques and theme parks. Beyond entertainment, Segatari also operated a weapons and military tech division, offering products through their virtual reality interface, a system integrated with armored combat power assist platforms. This division produced custom components such as interfaces and weapon links, widely adopted by military personnel and civilians alike, securing 80% of the market share in that area. Established in 2015, this branch quickly rose to become the 5th largest military electronics manufacturer. In 2045, Segatari launched the Rush Revolution console. The system boasted over 200 titles, support for multiplayer adapters, total environment upgrades, and backwards compatibility with the older Rush system, as well as CityNet online access. The Night City Police Department also adopted Segatari's VR tech at their police academy, using it to simulate hostage scenarios as part of cadet training. As of 2077, Segatari remains the largest game developer and arcade manufacturer on the planet, with its arcades and VR systems present in nearly every major urban center. Tsunami Defense Systems, also known by the names Tsunami Design Bureau and Tsunami Arms, ranks among Japan's top 4 arms manufacturers and is widely regarded as a world-class producer of advanced weaponry. The company traces its roots back to the 1990s, when 3 individuals, Toshio Yamabatsu, Timothy Davidson, and Michelle Taguchi, launched an airsoft gun business in Osaka. In 1998, after Japanese law changed to allow private firms to hold weapons manufacturing licenses, Tsunami quickly secured one and transitioned into a legitimate arms producer. It evolved into a secretive and innovative corporation, gaining popularity particularly among otaku communities, as well as wealthy clients looking for customized weapons. Tsunami's origins in the net shaped its public image. Rather than operating like a traditional corporate entity, the company developed a reputation for being non-conventional and loosely structured, staffed by a diverse range of individuals. Despite its seemingly limited manpower and resources, Tsunami managed to stay ahead of the technological curve, thanks in part to its early adoption of computer-aided design and manufacturing systems. This edge often left observers puzzled at how a company of its size could compete with massive arms producers like Militech in innovation and R&D. Initially, Tsunami focused on prototyping weapon designs. Once a design met their standards, they would license it out to manufacturers who handled mass production and distribution. Throughout the 2010s, several smaller manufacturers released weapons based on Tsunami's blueprints, most of which were known for their high quality and cutting-edge features. Later, operating under the name Tsunami Arms, the company began directly producing its own limited edition weapon lines, which included railguns, lasers, specialized sidearms, armor-compatible firearms, and custom handguns. These weapons were often tailored to individual specifications, particularly for clients who could afford such personalized builds. Many of these custom creations were intended for use in professional competitions or by elite operators. Interestingly, Tsunami's R&D division was at its smallest department, despite the company's reputation for being at the forefront of technological advancement. This was credited to a highly selective team of expert researchers and skilled netrunners. Although the division didn't generate substantial profits, it earned widespread respect as a think tank capable of theorizing solutions to nearly any technical issue, even when those ideas couldn't yet be realized due to existing technological limits. For many years, Tsunami operated in strict secrecy, focusing solely on high-end weapon design for governments, elite solos, professional competitors, and select corporations. However, between 2017 and 2020, the company expanded into the public market, offering its products to a broader consumer base. The shift proved highly successful, resulting in rapid, substantial economic growth. By 2020, Tsunami had established itself as one of the 4 primary arms suppliers to Japan's self-defense forces. By 2077, Tsunami Defense Systems had risen to become one of the top 3 weapons manufacturers worldwide. The corporation was best known for its premium sniper rifles, which featured advanced proprietary technology and came with equally premium price tags. One of its standout products, the new pistol, became widely regarded as the highest quality sidearm available, unmatched by any competitors. Zetatech is one of the prominent corporations involved in wetware, as well as computer hardware and software development. Initially a modest tech firm from California, Zetatech established a lasting foothold in Night City. Known for its expertise in computing systems and neural interface technologies, it became a key supplier of neural processors, microchips, and robotics throughout the US. By 2013 to 2020, their catalog ranged from cyberware and cyberdecks to full computer systems. Zetatech began as a new entrant in the high-tech world, seeking growth through traditional methods like corporate espionage and calculated use of force. Once it gained momentum, the company pursued international expansion in hopes of steady revenue streams and greater recognition. This often meant stepping into markets already dominated by competitors who weren't eager to share profits. After the Fourth Corporate War, Zetatech capitalized on new government contracts, gaining significant ground during the post-war Reconstruction period. With many rivals crippled or gone, the company secured numerous government deals during the rebuilding period. It became a household name in affordable 3D printers and surpassed Segotari as the global market for agents, with its Grade A series becoming one of the most common models in circulation. More importantly, Zetatech established itself as a major producer of aerial vehicles, known for creating cost-effective and durable models such as the Aerovox, Destination, and Heracles. From 2045 onward, the company broadened its focus beyond cybernetics and computing, investing heavily in aeronautics, which led to its rise as a major force in the transportation industry. Its Aerodyne gunships and various models of security, combat, and utility drones became widely used across many megacorporations. By 2077, Zetatech stood as a global leader in both cyberware manufacturing and aerial transport, offering high-quality products suited to all price points. The corporation had also become a key player in logistics and shipping. Among its best-known offerings were the Zetatech Atlas, widely used by Trauma Team and N54 News, the Zetatech Surveyor, favored by Kang Tao and Max Tac, and the Sigma K54 cybernetic arm. When the fuel crisis began to impact industry in the late 1990s, Biotechnica, a small company operating from a single office, developed a revolutionary solution, CHOOH2, a complex grain alcohol produced through genetically engineered yeasts and wheat strains. The potential of this was rapidly recognized, and within a few years, numerous vehicles and power plants had transitioned to the new fuel. Despite holding global patents, Biotechnica lacked the production capacity to meet worldwide demand. This forced the company to license production rights to several major agribusinesses and petro corporations, primarily Petrochem and Sovoil. These licensing agreements swiftly turned Biotechnica into a wealthy corporation. Beyond its CHOOH2 technology, Biotechnica also markets a wide array of bioware products. Always pushing for innovation, Biotechnica expanded globally, establishing facilities in cities such as Rome, Venice, Berlin, Paris, London, Seattle, Dallas, Night City, Sydney, and more. Biotechnica's research labs contributed crucial technology that enabled the Pacifica Confederation to develop bioengineered replacement species. The company is also actively involved in restoring animals and habitats across the severely damaged environments of the era. Over time, Biotechnica genetically engineered several crops adapted to Earth's drastically changing climate. Among these, frost corn, a hybrid species designed to thrive in all climate conditions, became especially popular. The megacorporation licensed cultivation rights for frost corn to national and local governments, most notably Alaska, as well as to private farms. These annual licensing fees gradually drained the budget of smaller farmers and agriculture businesses, forcing many to sell their land to Biotechnica itself. In response, these farmers and entrepreneurs formed Crimson Harvest, an anti-corporate group demanding an end to Biotechnica's exploitative practices. When Crimson Harvest organized peaceful protests, Biotechnica reportedly raised its prices even further and was rumored to have released a virus that damaged any crops grown from unlicensed seeds. As tensions escalated, Crimson Harvest grew more radical. The conflict reached a bloody climax at a Biotechnica facility in Paris, after which Crimson Harvest was officially designated a terrorist organization. This designation only intensified the struggle, drawing more anti-corporate extremists to Crimson Harvest and making it more dangerous than ever. Biotechnica's second major discovery was kept secret because it was illegal in most countries. In 2004, Francis Young succeeded in human cloning experiments, but it wasn't until 16 years later, in 2020, that he produced the first self-aware, fully functional human clone by implanting it with a construct personality. Initially, this development was artificial, but soon they began experimenting with inserting natural digitized personalities into clones using technology similar to the Soul Killer. Biotechnica's main R&D cloning facility, located in Night City, employed about 200 scientists and security personnel. One of Biotechnica's biggest goals was to restore the flora and fauna severely affected by climate changes in the 1990s. They operated facilities worldwide dedicated to this environmental restoration. In the 2020s, Biotechnica created a natural park in Night City called Lake Park. They also cloned animals, both to preserve endangered species and to sell them at high prices. During the Fourth Corporate War, Biotechnica remained as neutral as possible, enabling them to weather the conflict with minimal issues. They supplied both Militech and Arasaka with weapons and biological equipment, but due to prior agreements and ongoing support, Arasaka received many exclusive devices behind the scenes. By the 2040s, Biotechnica had become the world's largest biotech company. Their medical and biological advances resulted in cheaper cloned organs and limbs, as well as the repopulation of several nearly extinct species. Biotechnica built their new regional headquarters in Night City's corporate plaza when the rebuilding began in 2052. They also invested in developing Pacifica into a wealthy tourist destination, constructing the Biotechnica Venture Center in the planned Serenaissance sub-district. However, the project was never completed and was eventually abandoned after many delays and the outbreak of the Unification War. By 2077, the company was considered the third best place to work in Night City. Around this time, leveraging income from annual fees for fuel and crop licenses, Biotechnica expanded into the food production industry. They came to own many protein farms worldwide that produced synthetic protein derivatives on a massive scale. One of these facilities, the Biotechnica Flats, was located in the southern desert region of the Badlands on the outskirts of Night City and became the primary food source for much of the city. At some point, the corporation also acquired All Foods, a company specializing in synthetic food and beverage production and sales. Despite the company's publicly advertised positive contributions to society, a team of Biotechnica scientists, Dr. Joanne Koch, Dr. Diana Cuno, and Alexander Pushkin, were responsible for the deaths of at least 70 nomads from the Red Ochre clan. The group had used the nomad town as a test subject for Project Nightingale, research allegedly related to antibiotic development. To prevent information from leaking, Dr. Koch ordered Biotechnica Security to have her colleague Amelia Morton killed. However, the incident was eventually exposed, and corporate higher-ups pinned the blame on Dr. Cuno, who then attempted to flee the city. Media investigator Manuel Mendoza began looking into the project, hiring a netrunner known as Double O to hack into Biotechnica's net through the servers of Impala Automatics, a company collaborating with Biotechnica at the time. Unfortunately, both Mendoza and Double O were eventually found and killed. Kuroshi Opticals, also referred to as Matsushima Kuroshi Optics or simply Kuroshi Optics, is a Japanese tech corporation that originated in the mountainous region of Nagano Prefecture. A dominant force in the field of optics, Kuroshi is most widely recognized for its high-end cybernetic eye implants and scanning technologies. However, the company's reach extends far beyond cyber optics, with significant investments in orbital operations throughout both Asia and the Americas. Known for savvy marketing, Kuroshi promotes its products through prominent pop culture figures. During the Fourth Corporate War, Kuroshi found itself in conflict with European optics rival Zeiss, though the two eventually reached a ceasefire agreement and split their operational territories. Despite this treaty, tensions persisted in the form of surveillance and potential sabotage, keeping the rivalry alive in a Cold War state. The company is made up of two main divisions: Kuroshi General Cybernetics and Kuroshi Optics, with the latter generating the bulk of revenue. Initially established as a watchmaker, the firm, then named Kuroshia, rebranded as Kuroshi in 2013. It began expanding rapidly during the 1980s, eventually launching an orbital factory with support from JAB and Kenjiri Technology. This move allowed Kuroshi to seize a large share of the optics market thanks to the exceptional quality of its orbital manufactured products like the OptiShield, optical heads-up displays, remote cyber cameras, and OptiFlash glare protection systems. Kuroshi maintained a strong partnership with Kenjiri, even setting up a shared design lab in orbit to stay close to their manufacturing operations. By 2020, Kuroshi set its sights on capturing the Asian consumer base, especially targeting Hong Kong and Shanghai, regions known for producing cheap counterfeit versions of their products. In addition to their Nagano headquarters, Kuroshi operates out of key global cities including Tokyo, Osaka, Seattle, Night City, Washington, D.C., Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Singapore. Their technology is widespread, available from small retailers to major electronic forces. By 2077, Kuroshi had deepened its focus on orbital production, with most of its hardware manufactured in space. Around this time, Kuroshi also revealed it was developing tetrachromatic eye implants designed to broaden the user's perception of the visible light spectrum. Orbital Air, or OA, is a megacorporation headquartered in Kenya, specializing in cargo and passenger transport to Earth's orbit. It maintains additional major offices in the NUSA, France, Germany, Japan, and China, and works in close partnership with organizations such as the European Space Agency, the Japanese Aerospace Bureau, and the Neo-Soviet Socialist Republic. Orbital Air holds a dominant position in global orbital logistics, operating what is essentially a monopoly on space-bound transportation. Utilizing a large fleet of French-manufactured Hermes space planes, OA handles nearly all non-governmental orbital lift operations. While some nations maintain independent launch programs, none match the scale, reliability, or reach of OA's services. Most major corporations depend heavily on Orbital Air for their global and orbital shipping needs. In 2020, OA played a key role in supporting the Crystal Palace L5 orbital station, a luxury space hotel managed by the ESA. The colony, reserved for the ultra-wealthy, may not have remained viable without Orbital Air's ongoing logistical support. With virtually all commercial cargo to orbit passing through OA, the corporation found itself in a highly profitable and powerful position. Behind the scenes, a significant portion of Orbital Air's funding and covert assets were funneled into maintaining its dominance in orbital tech. During the 2020s, the company began closely monitoring the rise of China, whose commercial spacelift capabilities were advancing rapidly. The growth of Euroflight Corporation also raised concerns. Then CEO and majority shareholder Antoine Dubois became increasingly wary of OA's grip on the industry, slipping under growing pressure from these emerging rivals. One of OA's key facilities was the Johnson Orbital Facility, a hub where travelers bound for the Crystal Palace would transfer from Hermes spaceplanes to orbital shuttles constructed and maintained by OA. In a joint effort with the ESA and Australia's government, Orbital Air built and operates the Cape York Spaceport, which became the largest industrial site in the country. Part of this expansion involved OA's 2008 purchase of Hayman Island, which was granted sovereign legal status, effectively placing it outside Australian jurisdiction. The island later became Orbital Air's main corporate base. In the 2040s, OA constructed the NCX spaceport, continuing its infrastructure expansion. By 2077, Orbital Air had broadened its reach even further. In most economically stable nations, major cities now host Orbital Air space centers, equipped with airport-like amenities and luxurious design. While OA directly owns and operates the majority of its spaceplanes, some exceptions exist, particularly in Europe, where ESA-run craft are more common, and in Asia, where JAB-owned vehicles dominate local routes. The comfort and luxury of flying aboard an Orbital Air spaceplane is considered a premium experience, something that can only be appreciated by taking part in one of their flights. REO Meat Wagon Incorporated, short for Rapid Emergency Operations, is a company that offers paramedical services and is most recognized for its ongoing feud with Trauma Team. Despite having a large customer base, REO gained a reputation for trying to beat rival companies to emergency calls, often attempting to retrieve injured individuals before their competitors arrived, or outright intercepting them with their AV-4 aircraft to seize the patient. This aggressive tactic, referred to as meat jumping, was illegal, but notoriously difficult to prove in legal proceedings. These acts frequently led to violent clashes with Trauma Team. As these confrontations grew more frequent, tensions escalated. By 2020, REO began hiring additional solos to guard their Night City branches in case of direct retaliation from Trauma Team. In 2023, during the Fourth Corporate War, REO halted its AV ambulance services in over a dozen cities, opting to conserve fuel for areas facing more severe issues. REO continued operations after the war. By the 2040s, their fleet of armored ambulances still engaged in meat jumping, charging steep fees to patients originally affiliated with other companies, provided they survived the encounter. By the 2070s, REO had become a low-budget emergency provider in Night City, handling cases that Trauma Team declined, effectively the majority. Unlike Trauma Team's air units, REO operated outdated ground ambulances. It was commonly believed that many of their patients never reached a hospital, with some vanishing altogether. Rumors circulated that REO collaborated with city scavengers. Still, not all of their paramedics were negligent. a few sincerely aimed to do good work. In pursuit of profit, REO also monetized both patient and employee data. To support this, they embedded 2 devices in their Meditech's yellow field jackets, one to track location and another to log biometric data. Rather than transmit that data wirelessly, the company collected it once the jackets were turned in at the end of a shift. Trauma Team International, otherwise known as TTI, is a corporate provider of high-speed emergency medical services, recognized as the leading paramedical franchise of the 21st century. The company is renowned for its immediate response model, automatically charging clients the moment a retrieval request is activated. TTI maintains strategic partnerships with major corporations including Arasaka, Militech, Nightcorp, Biotechnica, and Kiroshi, allowing select employees to hold Trauma Team memberships at no personal cost. In addition to emergency services, TTI also develops and sells its own medical products for public use. Originally established in Seattle, Washington, sometime before 2020, the rise in crime and urban violence throughout the United States quickly elevated TTI to the status of a powerhouse within the American corporate landscape. The company soon expanded into Canada and eventually into European and Japanese markets, operating under the same name. By 2020, Trauma Team operated dozens of active units in every major metropolitan area. Their presence was firmly established in Night City, where they maintained a large-scale hospital facility. International branches included Trauma Team Japan, based in Tokyo, and Trauma Team Europe. Each unit was staffed by highly trained paramedical professionals deployed aboard heavily armored AV-4 aircraft, often accompanied by support vehicles such as mobile tankers and ground-based fuel stations. These aircraft were equipped with advanced life support systems, including tools like mobile cryotanks for critical patient stabilization. While their main responsibility involved reviving and stabilizing patients in life-threatening condition, trauma teams were not contractually required to transport those patients to a hospital afterward. During the Fourth Corporate War, Trauma Team International found itself overwhelmed, operating at full capacity as demand for emergency services surged. In an effort to reduce the flood of requests and maintain a neutral stance, the company made the decision to refuse service to members of Arasaka or Militech. Instead, Trauma Team limited their operations to civilian clients and imposed combat zone rates if any gunfire occurred within a 500-meter radius of the patient. Even with these restrictions and elevated charges, the company was still inundated with calls following every major engagement. In North America, Trauma Team managed to endure the war, though only by downsizing into regional service providers. The conflict severely strained both their internal resources and external supply chains, making it difficult to obtain parts for AV-4s and jets, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and even qualified personnel. As hospitals and medical centers collapsed, an increasing number of patients with injuries or illnesses ended up relying on Trauma Team. Many couldn't afford the steep costs But in some cases, Edge Runner crews pooled their funds to buy a single TT card, hoping it would be enough to get aid for at least one of their own. The company's appearance also shifted after the war. Previously, the iconic blue and yellow uniforms had symbolized calm professionalism, but the prolonged urban combat and surplus military gear forced TTI to militarize their teams. While their suits remained blue, they were now accompanied by military-grade helmets, combat-rated armor, power-assisted support gear in yellow, and integrated metapack systems, combined with a shrinking pool of trained medtechs. This transformation gave trauma team employees a new reputation of being stressed, burnt out, and quick to anger. By 2045, Trauma Team International had developed into a fragmented entity, operating as Trauma Team North America, a neocorp model. Individual teams became franchise-owned units, operating independently in cities and responding only to clients with active insurance coverage. However, by 2077, the company had restructured, regaining much of its former strength. As crime rates rose across the new United States of America, TTI increased its service fees and enhanced its arsenal, well beyond 2020 levels. Now, in the year 2077, a mercenary wrapped up in a do-or-die fight for survival will decide the fate of Night City. The relationships they forge and the choices they make will shape the people and the world around them. Legends are made in Night City. What will be theirs? Only time will tell.